Hey guys, my name is Matt, and today I'm going to be sharing with you how I built my website business and how you can build one for yourself too. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'll start it a few years back. I had a friend who actually approached me and let me know that they had someone who might actually want a website. So I did end up speaking with them, and sure enough, they wanted a website. So we kind of worked out an arrangement, and it was good. It was off to the races. I've got a client. That's kind of step number one right there. But more importantly, I had to build the website. Now, at this point, I didn't know a lot about CMSs or anything or content management systems, but one thing that I did know how to do was program with, HTML, basic CSS, things like that. And so what I started with is I actually hard coded this website for them using HTML and CSS. And I used a library called Bootstrap, which is a really fantastic library. If you haven't tried it out, it helps you to build pretty nice looking web pages. But needless to say, maintaining this website was an absolute bear, and I was not charging a lot of money to do it because this is sort of my first project. So I was just really excited to kind of get going on it. And this was not sustainable. When it came time to get a second client for my business, I kind of figured out pretty quickly that this wasn't going to be a sustainable way to handle things. So then I started looking around to see if there were any systems that could help me. I had played around with Wix before, Weebly, Squarespace, things like that, but I didn't really like those. Those kind of felt like cheating. It wasn't really web design. I was just dragging and dropping things for a customer. Also, it was not a very cost-effective solution. But then I stumbled across WordPress, which powers an absolute ton of sites on the internet. And so WordPress is what I still use to this day for clients because it's free, it's open source, and there's so many plugins, themes, and other things that you can attach to it. And you can really customize your site using WordPress really easily. So that's what I use for my clients. And so that's one of the things that I would recommend is, don't hard code your web pages unless you have to. But going with something like WordPress is really going to save you a lot of time. Probably one of the first things you're going to be looking at is a domain provider. So who are you going to get your domain from? Ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't have a huge preference on this. Most domain providers do very similar jobs at a very similar price. I was originally with GoDaddy for hosting and domains, so I ended up just sticking with them for the domains portion, even though later in the video I'll explain I moved away from them from hosting. So you can really buy your domain from anywhere for the most part, but if you are worried, GoDaddy is going to be a great option for you. And speaking of domain names, you're going to want to find one for your customer that's not too long, but not too short, typically, is the way you want to think of it. Ultimately, it's up to you and your client to decide, but I would say somewhere in the probably 8 to 12 character range is always going to be the best. When it comes to domain extensions, .com, .org, all of those, you'll have to kind of figure that out. If you're doing it for a nonprofit, I do .orgs usually, or if you're doing it for a commercial business, .com is the way to go. Next, let's talk about hosting. So when I first started doing web design for my client, I went with GoDaddy just because they kind of seemed like the default web hoster, on the internet. I found out pretty quickly that was a good idea in the beginning, but not necessarily something that was sustainable long term. A lot of it comes down to their pricing. It's just fairly expensive because they make it very easy for you. And when it came time to get a second client, I chose to go with a different hoster too. Now, I did go through a couple different hosters that weren't GoDaddy. I went through one place called N3 Servers. They seemed fine for a little while, but ultimately were, still not really the performance I wanted. Things were a little slow on that, and it just didn't work super well, but sure enough, they were cheap. And just as a quick side note here, it looks like N3 Servers has actually shut down at this point. Looks like they gave customers 2 days to get their data and get out. So that's not a great situation. So obviously, they're not an option anymore, nor should you go with them if they were. But then I found TMD Hosting, which did a great job. They seemed pretty good, pretty reasonable on the price. And then I started noticing with them, though, they were blocking all of my customers' IP addresses, so nobody could access their website. And so, I can manually go in and unblock these, but at the end of the day, that wasn't really what I wanted to do. I wanted it just to work. Reached out to their support, and they basically told me, nope, since you're on a shared hosting plan, we can't do that. That's part of our firewall. I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to have to switch to a new company. Little did I know, that was probably one of the best decisions I made for my business. I started shopping around for hosters, and then, I've heard a lot about AWS before, or Amazon Web Services, and turns out they are easily one of the best options out there for price to performance. What I'm using a system called AWS Lightsail, which is basically just almost standard web hosting. Well, it turns out switching to AWS was one of the best decisions I could make for my business. Their packages start out at about $3.50 here in 2021, and they are phenomenal. And that is for a VPS, a virtual private server. And just a quick side note here, there is a difference in different kinds of hosting. There are two primary options. One's called shared hosting, and one is called a virtual private server. The main difference between them is with shared hosting, you share your resources with other people on the server. So basically, you get a cheaper rate by doing it. Now, the unfortunate bit to that is you have significantly less control over how your site works and operates because you have to share those resources and you're oftentimes locked down because of it. And ultimately, I think that's why I ended up going with AWS, is just because I got a virtual private server at an affordable price compared to other companies which charge way more for their VPSs. But side note over. Now, the last piece of this puzzle is how I price it for my customers. Now, there's two ways you can go, and I'll tell you which way I do and which way I don't go. So the way I don't go is I don't charge by the hour anymore. So that's something I used to do. Charging by the hour sounds good, and it guarantees, how much you get paid, right? You work 40 hours, you get paid for 40 hours. However, there can be a lot more money made if instead of charging by the hour, you just charge flat fees. So there's a couple ways to do that too. You could say, okay, a website's $1,000, or something like that, and then, you specify how many hours that covers or something like that. But what I prefer to do is I don't charge my customers upfront for anything. I just charge them a monthly cost. So, hey, thanks for joining up for my service. There's nothing due upfront, but it's going to be $100 a month. Make them sign a 2-year contract, something like that. And that will make you way more revenue in the long term instead of charging, $1,000 up front and $25 a month if you just charge them $100 a month. And businesses like it too because it's very consistent for them. They know their website bill, it's $100 a month. It doesn't change. There's not a lot of questionality about it. It is just, it's this cost a month. And my customers seem to really like it. So those are a few ways that you can go about pricing it. You can price them by the hour. You can do a flat fee up front, or you can do a flat fee over time, which is what I prefer to do, just because ultimately it makes me the most money. Another thing I do, just real quick, is with my e-commerce websites, clients that do make sales through the website, I do take a commission in addition to that original fee. Usually I charge right around 5% on top of what the credit card company charges, so my customers usually charge somewhere around 10% fee per transaction, but that's a whole heck of a lot less than some other companies charge, so I make some good commission on it. They get to sell lots of products. It's a win-win for everyone. So if you're thinking about getting set up with a website business, what I would probably do first is go find a client. You can, make a website and promote it until you're blue in the face, but really you need a client at the end of the day. So that's what I would do. Before you go full bore on this, find a client, see if you can work out a good price with them, and then go from there. Because that client and their word of mouth is going to be worth significantly more than all the marketing you're going to do trying to get the first client. Now, it's definitely going to be hard to get your first client because you haven't proven anything yet. You don't have a ton of work under your belt. But, I would highly recommend finding a client before you go full bore creating this business. But I definitely would create your own website first. At least that way they have somewhere to go to and somewhere to kind of look and see what your work looks like. Even if you don't have a lot of existing clients, that first client can still gauge you based on the website that you've built for your business. And the last piece I really want to touch on here is customer service is key. When it comes to owning your own website business, be prepared to make changes to this website 24 hours a day. Obviously you can sleep, but just have the expectation that when a customer needs something, you need to fulfill it as quickly as possible. Because ultimately that is what's going to keep them happy and going to have them stick around, as well as spread that word of mouth to other customers. Another idea just to throw out there, you could do a refer a friend program. I did that initially with my business. It wasn't super successful, but I didn't push it too hard either. Just giving them some sort of a credit towards their account. Hey, if you refer a friend and they buy a website, I'll give you a $200 credit or something. And, that way you got a couple bills covered from me. So just another option to get some customers through your door, but that word of mouth is really going to be a huge deal. So making sure you're able to fix things and make sure the website's up most of the time. Alright guys, I know this has been a quick little video here, but thank you so much for sticking with me and learning how you can start your own website business and a little bit about how I did. If you have any questions for me, feel free to drop them in the comment section down below. But for now, don't forget to like and subscribe. Peace.